Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a few stark graphical representations of the severe shortage of labour that Tory policies, austerity, Brexit, COVID, have directly caused. And unlike some of the damage that the Conservative Party has inflicted upon the country, this one doesn't even seem to benefit them, not their paymasters. So it seems to be a matter of just pure incompetence rather than malice. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So earlier this year, the Bank of England were raising alarm bells about the labour shortage in the UK, caused by a more restrictive attitude towards economic immigration, as well as the loss of hundreds of thousands from the labour market due to ill health. I'm going to focus on this video, not so much on the immigration side of it, but on what should be a much more or a much less politically divisive issue of people of working age right now in the country who normally would have been part of the workforce but aren't. And the reason they aren't is Tory policy. Now, this first chart shows the waiting list, how the waiting list has grown since the Tories took office for medical treatments, hospital treatment. You know, you can see it continuing to fall in the final years of the last Labour government, and then it started its upward climb again as soon as the Tories came to power. After the dip caused by the cancellation procedures in 2020, the rate at which it has climbed since then has been greater than any time before it. But what's important to note is that many of these people will be of working age. While they're awaiting treatment, they may be unable to operate at full productivity. They may not be able to work at all. Also, medical conditions tend to worsen if not treated promptly. So the longer it takes to get treatment, the lower the chance of making a genuinely full recovery. So even after the treatment, some workers may still not be as productive as they once were. And this is a direct result of the government failing to provide the capacity in the NHS, reducing the number of beds, reducing the number of nurses and doctors and so on. You know, this is just one reason why failing to properly fund healthcare is just stupid. Not political, not a matter of political opinion, not a matter of whether it should be purely state funded or regulated, privatised or unregulated privatised. No, this is just economic illiteracy. Makes me shake my head to think, you know, there's a lot of people in this country who think like the distinction between Labour and the Conservatives. This is what I grew up with, this distinction. It still holds true for a lot of people today. They sort of think Labour are better with education and the NHS, but the Tories are better with the economy. Well, not only does the data show otherwise, but it doesn't even make sense. How can you optimise the economy without a skilled, fit and healthy labour force? The party that does healthcare and education best does best for the economy as well. Now there's another chart which shows the problem much more clearly, because this one shows the number of people between the ages of 16 and 64, the main workforce, who are economically inactive specifically due to long-term illness. A significant increase even before the pandemic hit, suggesting that the years of abuse of the NHS preceding COVID was taking its toll even before the pandemic. You know, what is certainly the case is that the government cannot just blame this on COVID. In fact, the rate didn't even seem to increase with the pandemic. Part of the issue is being put down to a lack of support to get people with long-term illnesses back into work. An occupation medicine expert told the Financial Times that people's health deteriorates the longer they're out of work, but that there is so little employment support in the UK for people with health conditions. There's no government thinking on it. And it's a very strange situation we're in, because on the one hand, you can see that we have more vacancies than people to fill them. Immigrating workers from abroad is impossible for many jobs now and much more difficult for others. But we have people who would be able to work, to do some of these jobs, but they need support into that work. They need extra provision. They need some help from the employer in order to do those jobs. Now, wouldn't it make sense for employers struggling to find workers to put that support in place? Maybe. It's not happening. You know, there are a lot of things that make sense to us, but if reality doesn't work out that way, then it seems there must be something wrong with our common sense. For example, how many of these employers know that they need to put some support in place, or what that support is, or have the confidence to do it? You know, for example, if you take the Brexit attitude on immigration, So Brexit supporters claim that EU membership meant cheap foreign labour taking jobs from British people. Well, I mean, we don't want cheap foreign labour as such. We're absolutely fine with labour as long as it's paid properly. But the thing is, right now, we don't have enough workers, foreign or domestic. According to the Brexit logic, two things should have now happened. First of all, UK citizens out of work should have found it much easier to get a job. This has not occurred. That is because unemployment is largely a problem of either lack of skills or an issue of geography. You know, if we have a shortage of nurses, for example, as we do, then getting an out of work retail worker to apply isn't going to help. Similarly, if there's a load of jobs in Milton Keynes, not a lot of help to people unemployed in Sunderland. You know, and the second thing that should have happened logically with a severe labour shortage is that employers should have put up their wages in order to attract more workers. But in real terms, this hasn't happened either. You know, there have been some increases. There were particular notable increases for, say, lorry drivers, customs officers, but I'm told by those who benefited, still largely wiped out by the high inflation. So it's not actually a real terms pay increase. But even so, the vast majority of industries haven't raised their wages in response to worker shortages. Like unions have managed to obtain some decent pay deals this year. But that was as a result of industrial action in order to protect their members from the cost of living, not so much a simple supply and demand response to the labour market. So what's happening? Well, it's simple enough. If a business needs more workers and it can't recruit them in the usual way, it's got two choices. I suppose three, it can find robots, but we can't suddenly expect a massive technological revolution to solve the problem overnight. So realistically, it's got two choices. The first, it can improve the pay and conditions of staff in order to attract more. Now, I get that some businesses, particularly small businesses, may not actually have that choice in reality, but let us just say, particularly large businesses absolutely have that choice. That would be an option. But even if they did that, because we know there are way more vacancies than people, and we also know that a lot of the people classed as employed are on 0 hours contracts, which they would not be in a month of Sundays if they had access to proper, reliable work. But all it would mean is moving workers from one employer to another. You know, a business puts up their wages, great. They take workers from somewhere else. Not so much the unemployment line. You know, we are about 1.5 million workers short for all vacancies in the country. Take hospitality, for example, which is on its arse right now. Only so many suitable workers for the industry. If a restaurant can afford to offer higher wages and it does so, what they do is pull workers from a competitor who can't. You know, that restaurant can then run at full capacity, but the industry as a whole has shortages still. So it doesn't help our national economy. You know, if you have fewer workers, your economic growth is limited. It's really that simple. So then your second option is just to shrink the business or the industry down to the level of the available workforce. You know, the workforce that you are able to recruit and retain. In the case of a large business, it just means shrinking the business. In the case of a whole industry without enough workers, it means some smaller businesses may fail, but the industry as a whole is certainly going to shrink. And again, another obvious example of this is hospitality. You know, the more successful restaurants, for example, may just have fewer tables or fewer sittings. You know, others will fail altogether. In terms of what's happening, it is a bit of both. There are some businesses increasing their wages to attract more staff because they're able to do so and they need to do so. But there are also some businesses scaling back or folding altogether because either increasing the wages isn't attracting more because there just aren't the workers in that area, or their profit margins are too tight to be able to do so. So they just have to scale back or fold. Or actually, it could well be for a large business that even if they could afford to pay the higher wages, because they'd have to do that across their workforce, that it's actually just makes more business sense to scale the business back. You know, and this is a common occurrence. We see reports of successful businesses going under or massively scaling back as a direct result of either export barriers, energy costs, or labour shortages. We see it on a weekly basis, if not daily. You know, average pay in the private sector does look like it's increased a lot. 6.2% this summer. That's a lot. But that's still a real terms pay cut. You know, another problem that crops up as a barrier to work is the Tory policy of making it not worth taking relatively low paying jobs or increasing hours for those who are in work increasing their hours, because for people on certain benefits, like the Tories keep saying they want to make work pay, but they don't. Because instead of like a smooth scale of support for workers at the low end of the pay rate, there are painful cliff edges. So it's like you can work a certain amount. If you work a few hours extra, you'll suddenly lose these benefits. So you end up with a situation whereby if you work a few hours extra, which you'd be happy to do, you lose more in benefit than the work pays. So especially for someone who cannot right now afford the basic cost of living, which is everyone in that position, of course you're not going to increase your hours. The government is literally paying you not to go to work. And all the government would have to do is maintain that income support for those people on those low wages, and they'd be able to work the extra hours. The labour shortages would ease a little. It would boost productivity because working more hours, and therefore economic growth. And it actually doesn't cost a penny extra of the public purse, because you're paying those people anyway for income support so they can actually not starve or freeze to death. So it's not costing the government any extra. In fact, it saves the government extra because some of that extra income will be taxed. And it would also mean people can afford to not cut back so much on either energy or food. And, well, there's VAT on energy and there's VAT on a lot of food. It's a no-brainer. And this is an issue of competence, because this isn't, like, sometimes I rage against Tory, what I'm raging against is Tory ideology, this blinkered ideology that doesn't work in practice. But this isn't part of Tory ideology to keep people out of the workforce. It's not right-wing thinking at any level to actually pay to keep people out of work or motivate them to reduce their hours. It's not part of Tory ideology to have businesses struggling for staff. In fact, the Tories once claimed to be on the side of this small business. Well, creating the conditions for a scarcity of workers is not really in tune with that. You know, this is just incompetence, pure and simple. You know, some of it could be put right overnight with a better government. Overnight, you could just change some of the way the Department for Work and Pensions deals with things, and all of a sudden you'd suddenly find the very next week people increasing their hours, all of a sudden businesses finding it a little bit easier to recruit staff or to get their current staff being able to work more hours. Some of it is going to be a massive issue for decades to come, no matter what happens. You know, I'm thinking there largely of that problem I started off with, the long-term ill health. You cannot solve that overnight. It's not even just that you cannot build back up the NHS capacity overnight. Remember, it took Labour over a decade and the work still wasn't done. But this is just a little snapshot of the crisis facing us in terms of the labour shortage right now. I've not, as I say, not really even considered here the impact on the productivity of workers, who are stressed about how they meet the cost of living. Because if you've got someone who's stressed about domestic situations back home, of course they're not as productive. Or they may have health problems related to substandard housing. We're seeing more reports of that lately, especially as we get towards winter. You know, there's so many pressures on our productivity. And they all point to an economy that's going to struggle to bounce back. It's not going to be able to. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.